Okay, let's go.
It's time for Be Picked. When you're ready to move from clicks to clients, learn to be picked.
Welcome to Be Picked, the podcast where we talk with professionals about how to improve their client acquisition. My name is Andrew Kolsky. I'm your host, and today we are fortunate to be able to speak with Pat Iyer. She is an author of 73 books. She's a legal nurse consultant with 40 years of experience, and she works with attorneys and other professionals as a book coach and editor. So I am excited to have you, Pat. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Andrew.
So, a lot of people ask questions about how do I get my name out there? How do I build my credibility? What's the best way to spend my time and resources if I really want to be the person that the customers pick? And you and I were talking the other day about books and the benefit the books can provide. So can you start off and just give us a little bit of background about why you got into books in the first place and what they've done for you in your career and your clients?
My first book evolved from a project that 3 educators, with myself being included, were asked to accomplish by our hospitals in the city of Trenton, New Jersey, to teach nurses about a particular language called nursing diagnosis. The 3 of us wrote a self-learning module so that we could not have to replicate the effort in all 3 facilities. We each wrote a third of it, put it together, used it in our 3 respective hospitals, and then when it was over, thought this would be a great book. So I approached the first publisher who said, lovely self-learning module, but we need textbooks. This is too basic. This is a workbook. We can't use this. We said, oh, that's too much work. And to a different publisher, lovely self-learning module, but it needs to be a textbook. Okay, now we've heard it twice. So we turned it into a textbook, which then was an important credential on my CV. I attended a workshop for nurses to describe different alternative careers other than working in the hospital as staff nurses. And the speaker talked about expert witnesses going into the courtroom to testify. I thought that sounded kind of interesting and challenging. So I approached some attorneys and immediately started getting cases. And they said, oh, you wrote a book about nursing diagnosis and nursing process. You're a med-surg expert. There was a high demand for med-surg nurses because of the frequency with which they were getting sued.
Mhm.
And it was also in the 1980s when the idea of having a physician testify about nursing care was being challenged. You need to have a nurse testify about nursing care. The doctors were told, oh no, I'm a doctor. I know how to direct nurses. Well, the legal system didn't agree with them. Therefore, I came into the field at a time when attorneys were searching for nursing experts. And then that led to more books published by traditional publishers. And then I began branching out over time into publishing my books through Amazon. And that's the pattern that I have followed ever since.
Fantastic. So, we've all heard, the saying, well, she must know what she's talking about. She wrote the book on it. And that really does stand out for people. And I can imagine in front of a jury when they're hearing that you've written a book, 2 books, more books about the topic, it really boosts your credibility in a very unique way that social media and other things don't do.
Yes.
So even today, with the internet and blogs and videos and all these things, books still matter. For myself throughout my career, I don't have 73 books, but I've written 4. One of them is a children's book. And for that purpose, because I had a special message that I didn't think was being shared. It boosted my credibility. It allowed me to share my information with others. And so it was sort of a win-win all the way around. So, so let's talk about attorneys for a second. What benefit would an attorney get if they considered publishing a book? Is it worth their time?
I can use the attorney answer of it depends. It
Okay.
depends upon their goal and the message that they want to convey. A number of people over the years have come to me as a book coach and said, I've had an interesting life, and I think people would be interested in my life. And yes, there are many people who've had interesting lives. Sometimes they're more interesting to you than to anybody else that you encounter. If an attorney wanted to write a memoir, for example, as the type of book that is probably the least rewarding from a business perspective, it would need to be written in such a way that would give the reader the life lessons that they could apply to their own lives, not a simple regurgitation of that attorney's life. Memoirs then can be a little tricky in terms of marketing to make sure that you have a story that will help other people, not only that you want to get it off your chest of what happened to you, but you can assist people with the things that you've learned. If we look at that category, there are attorneys who've handled phenomenally difficult and complex cases, and they can write a book about that case and the ins and outs. It can become a fascinating account for people who would consider hiring that attorney, as well as for other attorneys who might want to co-counsel. There are a few books on the market of that nature where the attorney is taking the reader through discovering information about the case, how that changed the nuances of the case, what the defendants, for example, were trying to hide, and how the attorney overcame it. It's
Mhm.
like unfolding mysteries. There's a level of people who would love more books like that. And it demonstrates the attorney's expertise and challenges.
Sure.
I read a book as an example, and I don't remember the author's name. He wrote the story of how he went after DuPont for dumping chemicals into the ground in the southern part of the country, and the cows and pigs in that area were showing up with all these bizarre birth defects. And his story was this arduous battle with DuPont to finally get them to address that site and clean it up and deal with all of the health issues that were affecting the people as well as the animals. The memoir, therefore, can be a very important part of an attorney's marketing plan. Another type of a book is, all right, Andrew, you drive out on the ice and snow in Virginia, you get rear-ended, you're not an attorney, you don't know the first thing about what happens in the legal system. You don't know what you should say and do at the scene. You don't know the importance of cooperating with the treating plan. You don't know what to expect with the deposition. I've heard stories from my attorney clients about how, and one I remember in particular was a woman who fell, and he was taking her deposition. He was the defense attorney. He was almost hypnotic with this woman, probing at her memory, and he got her to keep nodding her head and agreeing with him as he was taking her through what happened. And then at the very end, he said, now, ma'am, isn't it true when you fell, you really don't remember what happened? And she, by then, was in that pattern of agreeing with everything.
Right.
Her attorney pulled her aside at the end and said, you just destroyed your case because of what you said. She said, but he was such a nice man. And he brought us pastries and cookies. And I'm listening to this thinking she didn't get the appropriate level of preparation, or she just got sucked into the flow. And I'm sure attorneys listening to this can think of cases where their client did not do well and maybe could have been prepared differently, or maybe were just not sharp enough to see the trap that was right down the pathway that they were walking into.
Hmm.
So, a book that is directed to showing how well the attorney can work with people would be a great topic. For a defense attorney,
Hmm.
they're representing doctors and nurses who, as a nurse, I can tell you we were trained to want to help people. We want to fix problems. We can be sometimes also too trusting. Of course, the attorney who's taking my deposition will understand and will let me tell my side of the story. How do we prepare doctors and nurses for going through what can be a 3 to 5 year ordeal, and it keeps coming up with the same emotional costs over time, the shame, the embarrassment, the second guessing, the worry about what's the impact on my career. I could see a defense attorney writing a book that would help healthcare professionals get through the litigation process intact without damage to their ego, their self-esteem, their self-confidence. Those are some things right off the top of my head in terms of attracting people with your book. Very clear, the personal injury plaintiff attorney is always looking for that next client. The defense attorney needs to keep the carrier and the insurance company and claims adjusters. He needs to keep them happy with he or she with what they're doing. So they've got a different audience, but the same objective. I want to demonstrate my skill and capability in managing the claims.
Right. Right. So what you're talking about here involves a lot of storytelling, which is always a very effective technique, whether it be video or whether it be, in a book form. And those are all, wonderful ideas for books. But as you were talking, I was also thinking to myself, when you were first talking about the car accident, I was thinking there's really opportunities for, I don't know exactly what you would call it, but sort of a how-to book in terms of, okay, so you got into a car accident. What do you need to know? What do you need to think about? What do you need to do? You should document this. You should take a picture of that. You should, so almost like a little book that someone would keep in their glove compartment, for example.
Yes.
So, but even with that, the author now becomes credible in terms of auto accident law.
Yes, that's exactly right, Andrew. And the short books are very popular, in part because they cut right down to the chase of what we need to do. They are easy to get through. I was sitting in a book club yesterday, and somebody commented on how the chapters were short in this book. It was a book written, it was called Jim, and it was about Huck Finn's companion on the trip down the Mississippi River. And one of the people in the book club said, I liked it. They were only 3 to 5 pages per chapter, and I could get through the chapters fast.
Right.
That's something that appeals to many of us who don't want to open up a chapter like I do. I typically don't stop reading until I get to the end of the chapter. And some of the books have 20, 30 pages. So a short chapter or a short book becomes very popular.
Right. Right. Another thing I was thinking as you were saying that is that today, you know, you, I read a lot of posts and things that attorneys put on LinkedIn and other forums. And when they talk about finding clients and getting their practice started, they all talk about, search engine optimization. You
Mhm.
see it everywhere, SEO, SEO, SEO. And yes, that's important to get people to find you. Absolutely. But nowadays, with all of the AI, now we've got answer engine optimization, which is an entirely different animal. And so if you're going to be putting information out, you need to do sort of a question answer format that is more meaningful to the answer engines or the AI engines. And I'm
Mhm.
just thinking, if you had a book, it lends itself to now giving you the opportunity to pull ideas and concepts from the book in a shorter form, put those out as more of a question answer in a blog or in posts that you put online or so on and so forth. So now you're taking all the hard work that you put into the book and you're not just leaving it in the book, you're expanding it into the broader universe to really get your name out there. And then it drives people back to the fact that, oh, and he's the guy that wrote the book on
Mhm.
this.
Mhm. Exactly. Those short questions and answers, there's a format for a short book called the frequently asked questions and the should ask questions, which are not necessarily identical. Your level of knowledge, Andrew, about the topic brings up questions that you know people should ask, but I don't know that I should ask that question. That
Right.
could be a video script. That could be a blog post. That could be a social media post. Any number of ways you can repurpose the content in the book and should, and drive people back to the law firm's website where they can order the book, they can get a consult, they can discuss their case. It's all sitting out there working for you if
Hmm.
you structure it properly.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's take the concept of someone who is in a smaller practice or a sole practitioner or something like that, and they want to pursue a book. And they think about the things that we've talked about already, and they kind of come up with a type of book they want and the topic that they want to write as it relates to their practice area. What types of things do they need to think about to get started and ultimately get finished? What's involved?
Being very clear on your target audience is primary. Understanding what are their concerns, their fears, their frustrations, their challenges. Where can they get themselves in trouble? Like, as an example, this woman who was so nice to the attorney taking her deposition that she fell right into a trap. Understanding their needs is important. And then sequencing the information in a logical way. That could be from broader concepts down to more specific, or it could be a step by step. Here's the first thing that you do at the accident scene, and here's the first thing that you have to consider when you go to the emergency department, and not say, oh, I'm fine, if you're not fine, and on through the litigation process. As a book coach, what I have discovered is sometimes the sequence is obvious to the person, but they have it in a reverse order. They're thinking in terms of, well, let's drop them right down into the middle of this instead of, we need to do some basic overview first. Having a plan for writing is also critical. I
Mhm.
am sure, Andrew, if you said a year ago, I think I'll do a podcast one day, the one day would never result in you putting attention to it. If you say, I want to have a podcast that I'm going to launch in 2026, then you've got a goal. Now
Right,
you know what you need to do.
right.
When you're writing, are you going to write a little bit every day? Are you going to write on the weekend? Are you most active in terms of your creativity in the evening? Or is first thing in the morning better? Do you have specific goals in terms of when do I want to get this finished? And with an accountability system in place, whether that's a spouse, a colleague, a book coach, somebody to say, hey, Andrew, you said that you were going to have chapter one done by next week. How are you doing with that? That helps people move along. Otherwise, other priorities can very quickly swamp something like writing a book. And it seems like, well, I've got indefinite time to finish it. And maybe you don't. You don't
Right,
have indefinite time.
right, right. Well, that's that's definitely an important part, especially for someone who maybe is in a small practice or a sole practice, because they've got all these other deadlines on their head that they can't ignore. That they don't want to commit malpractice, and they probably have a family that they're trying to pay attention to, and then comes the question, where do I find the time? Now that's a universal question that a lot of people have.
Mhm.
um any tips on what they can do in that situation?
Putting it on your calendar, making a date with yourself is helpful. Being realistic, you might say, I'm going to block off 7 hours on Saturday. Well, maybe 7 hours is too much time. Maybe you've got other things that you've got to take care of. What's going to work for you will be individualized. Making steady progress is encouraging, and also being aware of there are little demons that sometimes stop us. Oh, I'm not good enough. Who would listen to me? What do I have to say? Other people who are far more experienced than me could be writing this book. All of that negative self doubt, you can start spinning in. You have to recognize it for what it is, which is a barrier that you have to get through, get over, because all those other experienced people haven't written books. That doesn't mean that you can't write one yourself. And you would be horrified, Andrew, if I told you about the number of people I've encountered who got mostly finished with a book and then it sits on their computer because they're fearful of releasing it. And it sits and it sits and it sits.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that would horrify me, because for me, if I'm going to put that much effort into a project, let's get it done, cross the finish line. Wow. Well, I also wonder, especially since you work with professionals, with nurses, with doctors, I mean, with lawyers, and others in writing books. Do you find that a lot of those, because they have a particular type of writing they do for their profession, that crosses over into what they try to do into a book that may not resonate with an audience?
Well, yes, it's clear nurses tend to write in the way that they would chart in a medical record, short, choppy sentences. Attorneys may have a lot of words that they learned in law school that are pretty much beyond the understanding of the average person. Theretofore and herein, and just immediately comes to mind.
Right.
If you keep your audience in mind, you're writing for your target audience, then you have to adjust the tone accordingly. Now, an editor will pick those terms up and simplify writing. And I do want to make the point, Andrew, because I've run into this a number of times. We also tend to have an ego about our abilities. It's important when you're working through this process to recognize that somebody can see something in your writing that you can't see. It's invisible to you. And I've had a few people in my life who I remember very clearly who said, how dare you edit my work? My work is perfect the way that I wrote it. Well, no, it's not. So you have to put your ego aside and say, let me hear what other people say about my material, and then I can modify it accordingly.
Hmm. Yeah, that is a real issue, and I'm thinking to myself, so, just for the audience's benefit, I happen to be an attorney as well as a mental health counselor, and I have many clients from the mental health side who are authoring books, and they run into a real challenge of, if they belong to a book club or something and they share their draft, and then they get all this feedback, and it's crushing, because they thought that they had the perfect manuscript, and then they get all this feedback of changes, and it really crushes their spirit, and it makes them kind of step back and have to rethink. And you know getting a book out there is not an easy thing in terms of, oh, I wrote a manuscript. Let me just send it to a publisher. They'll publish it and everything will be fine. Um, Tell us a little bit about how that works. So let's say they get all the way through, they have a book, they've worked with an editor, it's now ready to go. Then what? What are the chances of getting it published?
Two different routes, the traditional publisher or the self-publishing exist. For the traditional publishing, it used to be that the publishing houses would foot all the costs and then know that if they published 100 books, maybe 10 of them would really be winners that would fund the rest of the books. However, the publishers have become more averse to the risks associated with publishing and are increasingly asking authors to fund and subsidize the publishing process, sometimes as much as $50,000 to get your book published by a major publishing company, which typically will not be interested in talking to you unless you have a platform for selling the book. You have a lot, and like hundreds of thousands of social media contacts. You have an active YouTube channel. You have active social media channels. You're a great risk for that publisher. But if you don't have those things, then they're likely to either not be interested or you find yourself in the hands of a hybrid publisher, which means, yes, Andrew, we'll be happy to publish your book, but you will pay for the editing, you will pay for the layout, you will pay for the cover design, you will pay for the marketing. I'm sure there's some other things that we could charge you for as well. Some of them we may tell you about in the beginning, and some you might find out as you're in the process and it's too late. Those are contracts that have to be read very carefully. And essentially, you are paying somebody else to do all of those steps. When you self-publish, then you are responsible for getting that book ready for production. There are people who can help you with that. They won't charge you near as much as a hybrid or vanity publisher will charge you.
Mm-hmm.
That's why self-publishing became such a popular option and why Amazon in particular has made uploading books really easy. I've walked through the process with several of my clients. It's a question of knowing what each screen is asking. It's not difficult. And then it's up to you to promote it, to launch it, to keep on taking that content, as we talked about before, and spreading it around and directing people back to a website and to the book.
Right, right. And all of that is important when you think about, or I guess you need to be thinking to yourself, what is my goal? What payoff am I trying to get here? Because it's one thing if you're trying to write the New York Times bestseller mystery murder novel. It's an entirely different thing if you're trying to gain credibility for a potential client base. And, my personal experience in the books that I wrote, they're all self-published. Why? Because it was a message that I was having to give out verbally over and over and over constantly. And I said, I'm just going to put this in a book. Then people can have the book. They'll have it. It's in context and I don't have to deal with it. And so I'm not interested in being a bestseller. I'm interested in having a tool that's available to people who want that information. And so are are you going to make money self-publishing? No. I get a couple bucks here and there, but it's not a money maker. It's more of a credibility builder, which is why I went and did it that way. What has your experience been with your clients?
I joke that I've made about 35 cents an hour in royalties for some of the books that I've written, but I have made millions of dollars because of the doors that opened to me as an expert who then recognized that I couldn't do other types of nursing cases myself. I did med-surg cases. An attorney came to me and asked me to review an emergency department case. I said, that's not my background, but I've got a colleague who would be perfect. And I put the two of them together, and then the proverbial light bulb went off over my head. And I thought, well, maybe attorneys need other types of experts as well. That led to a business that I developed over 30 years, supplying expert witnesses. That's where the millions came in because I had 200 experts under contract at the time that I sold that company, and they were billing for me. And
Hmm.
it was a beautiful thing.
Sounds like a beautiful thing.
And it started with that first book on nursing process and nursing diagnosis when I
Right.
got my first expert case.
Fantastic. Well, I hate to say that we've run out of time because I feel like we just got started here. But the concept and the information that you shared is very meaningful and useful for people. It's another thing that can be done in terms of building credibility, to build your practice, to build your notoriety, to build all the things that you're looking to build. It does take some time. It does take some planning, but there's coaches like Pat that are available. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, Pat, could they do it?
Sure, it would be best to go to my website, which is patiyer.com. My last name is spelled Iyer. It can be confusing. I don't like to be called Pat Liar, especially as a former expert witness. patiyer.com, and I've got some free reports, and there's a contact form there. I'd be happy to talk to your listeners and encourage them. If you've got a message that you want to share with people, go ahead. Don't let self-doubt and don't let the busyness of life stop you from sharing your message. The rewards can be significant of writing a book.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I want to remind our listeners also, if you're looking for a simple way to take your information, to get it out there in terms of blog posts and LinkedIn posts and YouTube videos that you don't even have to be there to record, take a look at the bpicked.com website, be-picked.com. That's what we're all about, is taking all the hard work that I had to do and turning it into a simplified process where it's basically done for you. So with that, we look forward to seeing you on the next show, the next episode of Be Picked. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
If you are enjoying this content, please like and subscribe. Thank you.